Hello, everyone. We've been for an absolute treat today. Before I introduce today's special guests, I just want to start by respectfully acknowledging that the land that we are on, that you are on, always was and always will be Indigenous land. And I pay my respect to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging. A long way from Indigenous land right now, over the seas in the UK, is Dr. Emily Grossman. Dr. Emily is an expert in molecular biology and genetics, which I'm certainly not. She lives for science. She loves showing us why it's important and why we should sit up and take notice of it. And even if we don't, it's going to have its effects on us. Emily makes science fun, which it is, but some of us sometimes need Emily to remind us why it's such fun. She's written a couple of great books. Her first one was called Fizzing Facts, Awesome Science Questions Answered. And she's just written the latest book. It's called World-whizzing Facts. Again, awesome Earth questions answered. And I can't wait to hear more. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Nick. It's so nice to be here.
This is great. This is fantastic. Emily, Dr. Emily, can I start by asking you, why is science important?
Oh my gosh. So science is just everything. Everything is science. So when I was 5 years old, my favorite word was why. I was constantly asking questions. I was like, what does this mean? How does this work? Why does this happen? Why do I have to eat my vegetables? Why can't I pick my nose? Like all sorts of things. Why is the sky blue? Why is it raining? You know, everything. And I used to drive my teachers and my parents completely bonkers. But the thing is, that is what science is. Science is about asking why. It's about questioning. It's about finding stuff out. And what I love about science is it's just everywhere around us. And also that science is not necessarily about getting stuff right. It's not about asking why and knowing exactly what the answer is. It's about that exploration of asking questions that get us towards the right answer. So I love that in science, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as like a wrong answer. It's all about just exploring things and trying to figure stuff out and having a go and having a guess. And in science, sometimes the most amazing discoveries in science come about by people making mistakes, by people getting things wrong. My favorite. Can you think of any examples, Nick? Do you any examples?
I know the one. I know penicillin, of course, is a
That's
famous
the one.
example.
That's my favorite one.
Yeah,
There's a lot of examples of like famous scientific discoveries that happened by mistake, or they were looking for one thing and they found
something else. But that's such an important one, isn't it?
Exactly. So penicillin is that's certainly the one that I mentioned in the introduction of my book, because that's the one that's always really inspired me, because Alexander Fleming, he wasn't a particularly kind of famous or well-known scientist. He was just an everyday scientist working away in his laboratory, and he was doing an experiment on bacteria. And he was growing his bacteria on what's called a Petri dish, which is a little round plate covered in kind of sugary food to feed the bacteria. And he put it down on his bench, on his laboratory bench, and he went off on holiday. But he made a mistake. And the mistake that he made, so the story goes, is that by the bench, he left the window open. Now, what happens, Nick, when you leave a bit of food, so sugary food for the bacteria to grow on, by an open window when you go on holiday? Apart from the fact someone might climb in and nick it.
That's what I was going to say, exactly.
What actually happens?
A cat climbs through a window and eats it.
Well, yes, that's also quite likely. But in terms of it, assuming nobody comes in from the outside, no cats, no robbers, what's going to happen to that food, let's say a piece of bread or whatever, by an open window?
Well, so if I leave bread around for 3 days and go on holidays, it comes back and it's green. So it goes moldy.
Green.
Yeah.
It's moldy. So the green stuff, the fluffy stuff, that's mold. And that's what happens. So when Fleming got back from his trip, I don't know where he'd gone, he came back and he picked up his Petri dish and he looked at it and he said one of the most important phrases in science. Now, a lot of people think the most important phrase in science is Eureka, I've got it. Do you know who said that, Nick?
Yes, Archimedes.
It was Archimedes when he was getting in.
When he ran out of the bath.
Exactly, who actually got in the bath and all the water spilled over the top, and he went, oh, now I understand displacement and density, and I understand that my body has displaced the same amount of water as was in the bath. Anyway, it wasn't Eureka, but Fleming said, that's funny. And the reason he said that is because what he noticed was that he was about to throw away his Petri dish because he realized it was covered in mold. But before he chucked it in the bin and probably sort of thought, oh, I'm a terrible scientist, although he didn't, luckily, because so what if you make a mistake? That doesn't matter. That's the whole point. Because what he did is he had the creativity and the sort of presence of mind to look at it again. And that's when he said, that's funny, because he noticed something strange. And he looked at it, and what he noticed was that around the fluffy bits of mold that had grown on the Petri dish covered in sugary food for the bacteria had died. Now, the reason that he had the sort of the imagination to look at this again, because that's not what he wanted to happen. He didn't want there to be mold on his proper experiment. But he realized that actually at that time, there was nothing that was known to be able to kill bacteria. And in hospitals all over the world, people were dying from bacterial infections, the sorts of stuff that nowadays wouldn't be a problem at all, kind of cuts getting infected or throat infections, that those days they couldn't kill. They couldn't cure because they couldn't kill the bacteria. So he was like, oh my God, maybe, just maybe, there's something in this fluffy bits of mold, which I thought was just, something bad that had happened, that's actually really magic. Of course, it's not magic, it's science. So he had the ingenuity, another good word, to study that mold and to see what was in it. And along with some other colleagues, he went on to isolate the first ever antibiotic, anti-killing biotic bacteria, living material. And he called it, as you told us earlier, Nick,
penicillin.
He didn't call it penicillin, but yes, his colleagues called it penicillin. And penicillin went on to save millions and millions of lives. So I really love that example about why science is important, because it's important because it tells us about the world. It helps us save the world. It helps us protect people. It helps us protect the planet, which we'll come on to in a bit, protect animals. And it helps us go to space. It helps us to learn about the universe. But it also is something that isn't necessarily about always being right and always getting things, doing things the way that we're supposed to do things. It's about thinking outside the box. It's about being creative. It's about using our imagination. It's about looking at things twice and going, what might that mean? It's about asking those questions that other people will think, oh, I'm not going to ask that, it's a bit silly. And then figuring out that actually that's the way to get to the answer. Our brain actually makes more connections and grows and develops better when we get things wrong than when we get things right. And I think science is the perfect way to really embrace that. So much of what we know about biology these days dates back to Darwin and Wallace, who discovered natural selection and evolution, and so much that we know about the planets and about the whole the universe dates back to early understanding, as you said, about how the planets go around the sun, and even the first understanding that the earth was round and it wasn't flat, because for a long time people thought it was flat, and everything builds on it. So yes, back in the day there were lots of theories that were proven to be wrong, but these days, the science, I think it was Isaac Newton who said that, standing on the shoulders of giants, that's what we are. We're just building up this pyramid of giants and giants and giants, and now we've got so much incredible discovery that we're learning from. And I think what's also wonderful is the realization that science is for everyone. There's this kind of bit of a stereotypical image, isn't there, really, Nick, of what it is to be a scientist. I mean, if I went out into the streets of Melbourne and I kind of went to an average person, probably an adult, because kids these days are a lot more sort of a lot more switched on, but if I went to the average sort of adult and I said, draw me a picture of a scientist, what do you think they'd draw?
Yes, so yes, it would probably be a man for starters, and they'd probably there'd be glasses, and they'd have a bit of a beard, and they'd have a white coat, and and that sort of thing. And they'd be holding a test tube. That's sort of the stereotype. Am I right?
The exact image, isn't it? And like, in a way, we can't blame people for that, because that is what we see kind of in a lot of history books and a lot of kind of popular culture. When we see scientists in movies, not so much these days, and in TV series, we do see an old white man with crazy hair wearing a lab coat with his test tubes, with his glasses. This man is if we were to dig a bit deeper and we were to dig into what's this cliche of what this man is like, what's this man's personality like as well?
Yes, well, he'd be pretty He'd be totally obsessed with everything he did about science, and he'd be a bit mad, and he'd get some things wrong, and he'd be a bit fumbly in lots of things, and but
Exactly.
you don't look like that to me, and you don't sound
I'm
like
not
that
like
to
that.
me.
I'm certainly not like that. So, we've got this image.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, we've got this image of this old white man, and he's probably he's very into stuff, and that's cool. But he's maybe the stereotype is he's also a bit boring, a bit awkward. If I said to you, what's his sort of social life like, you'd probably think, oh, he's a bit dull. And
yes,
I asked this of a group of people once, and they said, oh, he's probably single. And I was like, that's complete rubbish. And sort of, not very good at sort of getting on with people. And the thing is he'd very certainly be straight. And just all of this like crazy stereotype is not only wrong, it's just completely damaging, because actually that's not at all what it's like to be a scientist, and that's not at all the sort of people who make good scientists, because science is really for everyone. And I've worked in my years as a scientist, I've worked with all sorts of different people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different genders, not just male or female, we've got non-binary or trans, different sexualities, whether you're queer, whether you're not, different ethnic backgrounds, male, female, everything, and different looks, because of course science is not about like what you look like or what your personality is like or how sociable you are. It's actually about a passion for science. It's about curiosity. It's about a desire to understand the world, and with that comes creativity. It comes a willingness to imagine things, to think outside the box, to dream, to think kind of creatively. And also comes a lot of passion, a lot of desire to help the world, to make sense of the world, to care deeply about your experiments, about the things that you're doing, about inventions, about what it is that you want to create. And also what's really important about science is that yes, some people in science do work on their own, because some people work better like that. So I actually do quite like working on my own, but I'm also a very sociable person. And actually science is also a lot about collaboration and teamwork. And more these days, there's really important roles in science for people who are really good team players, who have a lot of empathy, who can really work together with others, who can understand other people's points of view. And more, particularly to help look after the planet, we really need people who are very connected to other people, to the world, to animals, to our natural world, to wildlife, to nature, to trees, to help to understand the science in those ways. And also people who are switched on to connecting with the whole universe, and that's a really creative way of thinking. So this stereotype is just completely wrong.
You're right. And now there's probably lots of kids watching you now. There'll be lots of kids watching you now, and they are thinking, they were listening to all of that, and they're going, I love dreaming, I have an imagination, I want to help, I want to do something useful, I want to save the planet or help save the planet, I want to do this, I'm sociable, I love collaborating. They're all sitting there doing that now. When you were 8 or 9 or 10, and you had that inquisitive nature, did you know then that you wanted to be a scientist? Or did you know it even sort of existed, or did you just tell me what you were like when you were that age?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So when I was 8 or 9, I had two passions. Actually, quite a few passions, but my main two passions, one was science, and actually maths as well. I loved all stuff that was like analysing, solving problems, making sense of things, because there is a part of science and maths that is about problem solving and figuring stuff out. And I've got a really analytical mind, and I'm actually autistic as well. And like my brain loves logic, and it loves following through a logical argument and going, A plus B makes C, and then going, well, why? Why does it make C? And why is it this? And why is it that? And I love solving problems, and I love like crime series. And I love I had puzzle books. My bedroom when I was 8 was full of puzzle books and crosswords and like number puzzles and things, and I just loved that. So a lot of what I love about science is actually just solving problems, not just relating it to the world, but actually just problems for problems.
You should have been a detective. You should have been a detective.
Well, I actually often think, because I'm obsessed with crime dramas, and I often think, maybe if I hadn't been a scientist, maybe I'd have been a detective or a psychologist, because I also love analysing how people think and how I think and why I do things a certain way and why my friends think certain things. But the other thing I was really passionate about was theatre. So I really loved performing, like singing and dancing and performing on stage. And so often people would say to me back then, like, oh, you know, that's a bit different. They're sort of two different things. And I was like, well, no, they're actually quite similar. Like, I don't see myself as, but that people would say, well, you have to choose. You know, are you going to be a scientist or are you going to be an actress? And I was like, I don't want to choose. Why do I have to choose one of these two things? So luckily I had very supportive teachers who really nurtured both of these sort of loves of mine. And I did, I studied science all the way through secondary school and maths and science in my A-levels, as we call them in the UK. But I also did a lot of performing. So I did theatre and singing and drama, and I was in plays and musicals. And when I went off to university to study science, I decided, my teachers recommended to go down the academic route first, to say, well, you know, if you love science and you love drama, the best thing to study is science and keep up the drama and the theatre as a passionate hobby for now, because it would be harder to go back to science later in terms of the academic route, the university route. And that was great advice. So I kind of did both. And then eventually I did turn it on its head, because I did a degree in science. I then did a PhD in genetics.
So I PhD for those. PhD is the highest thing you can possibly do at university. So
yeah, that was doing experiments in a laboratory. So
and that makes you a doctor.
Yeah, that's what makes me Dr. Emily. So I was working in the field of cancer research, and I was doing experiments in a laboratory, and I was still doing plays and musicals in every single minute of my spare time. But when I finished my PhD, I was like, okay, I'm going to shift things around for a bit. And I actually went to drama school, and I trained as an actress and singer, and spent the next 8 years working part-time professionally doing plays and musicals, and part-time as a maths and science teacher. So I had an opportunity to sort of do bits of both. And then now what I do, I stepped away from professional performing because I sort of realized that it wasn't really working for me. It wasn't really where my heart was. But what I now do is I kind of combine the bit of me that loves solving problems, that's like the detective, the science detective, with the part of me that loves teaching and communicating, which is what I found as a teacher, and the part of me that loves theatre and singing and dancing and performing, which is effectively what I'm doing now, talking to you, because knowing that there's hundreds, maybe thousands of people who are going to be watching this, it's a bit scary. And I combine that all now as a science communicator. So giving talks like this, or interviews, writing books, and just kind of making science fun and exciting and accessible for young people and for adults. So I've found, finally, you know, it's taken me a long time, just the right career for me. And the thing I often really love to say to kids is, you know, when I was 8 years old, I didn't know that there was such a thing as a science communicator. And for a lot of you guys watching, you know, the thing you end up doing maybe doesn't even exist yet. Yes. And there will be something that is like the perfect way for you to combine all the different things that you love, all the different things that you're good at. You don't have to be the best at it. You know, I wasn't always the best at science, but I worked hard. But it's about passion, and it's about tenacity. That means keeping going and determination and not giving up. There were so many times when I failed at things, where I got things wrong, and I went home and cried. I'm very, very sensitive, but I kept going, and I came back and I was like, right, okay, how can I try this differently, or try it a different way? And I didn't always have an easy time. You know, I was quite bullied at school, and I was sort of sometimes the kid that people picked on because I love science sometimes, or because I wanted to learn and study, and wasn't always that popular. I was always a bit weird and geeky at school, and you know, I luckily I didn't let that put me off, and I kept going. And there's been many times when I was going to quit, and during my PhD there were times when all my experiments were going wrong, and I thought I was a failure and I couldn't do it. But luckily I had people around me who I could turn to, who supported me to keep going. So, you know, what I want to sort of really say is that no matter who you are and what your interests are, or what you might have very diverse interests like me, theatre and science, or it might be sport, or it might be chess, or it might be, I don't know, painting, but there will be a way to find something in the future where you can combine all the different things you love doing, whether that's in your job or whether that's in your personal life, but just to keep going with all the things that you love, and don't let anybody ever tell you to stop doing something, or you're not good enough, or you need to just do one part of who you are, because actually everything that you are is what makes you a fully rounded, amazing human being, and what will add to the contribution that you can make to the world as you go through your life. And that might change. You know, I've had 5 different careers so far. I've also got ADHD, so that's part of what kind of keeps me pinging from different things. And I've learned that actually that's, you know, a really positive thing. And now I'm a science author, and who knows what I'll be in 5 years' time. So
that's such great advice, because there'll be so many kids there that feel as if they don't belong or they don't fit in. But, you know, as you said, you didn't know what a science communicator was when you were 8 or 9. So you just, you know, you will find something. You just follow what you love, and don't let people say you can't do this or do that. Don't fit into a box, all that sort of stuff. That's wonderful. Look, I really would love to hear now. I want to talk, maybe go into your first book, Brain Fizzing Facts, because I'm dying to know some of the strange things in science that I know that you've written about, and which are always blow my mind. So can you do you want to give us a couple of brain fizzing facts?
Sure.
Thank
so
you.
I'll start with I think possibly one of my favorite facts from Brain Fizzing Facts, my first book. It's actually my second book, but my first in this series.
Oh, sorry.
Which is that did you know, well, actually, let me start with this. So let me ask you, Nick, are you ticklish?
Am I ticklish? I'm very, very ticklish.
And do you like being tickled?
No, well, yes and no. Sometimes it's quite fun, but if it's too much, it's not. So
yes,
it depends on the mood a little bit.
So I would say that, you know, it can be fun, but I think most of us actually, we don't like it. No, we don't actually like it. So did you know that you can block a tickle? There is something you can do to stop a tickle from being ticklish. And of course,
I would love to know. I would love to know that.
Exactly. This is my point, is that given that most of us don't actually enjoy being tickled, wouldn't it be nice if there's something you can do that doesn't involve, you know, punching the person who's tickling you, or kind of just karate chopping them out the way? There is something you can do based on science that can stop a tickle from feeling ticklish.
Okay.
So I'm hoping at this point you want to know what it is.
I so want to know, because I'm going to use it.
In my book, in the book, I actually lay this out as a sort of multiple choice with like 4 different answers. Okay. But I'm not actually in this case, so I'll find the ticklish page. So here's the, just to give you an example of the illustrations, that's sort of what it looks like. That's the tickling page. But I'm actually I'm going to work us through this, because what I love about science is that for every wrong answer, it helps us get to the right answer. And like I said earlier, we can usually get to the right answer by just thinking about what we do know and working through to therefore what that can tell us towards what we need to know. Yes. So let me ask you this. Let's start by this. So have you got any ideas, thoughts or suggestions about anything that maybe could help us block a tickle?
So the only thing that comes to mind is actually to use your mind and try as hard as you possibly can to think of something else. But I don't think that works.
So this is exactly where I'm going though, because yes, that won't work, but it will work a little bit. But it will work a little bit. And using that, we can work out what's going to work better. Because actually, if you really focus mind over matter, and particularly if you focus on something really unfunny, something really boring, like, I don't know, what you had for breakfast, then, you know, it may be that you're able to overcome those tickly feelings, even just a little bit. So the
problem is I had a banana for breakfast, and bananas are funny, so I've got to think of something else.
Bananas are very funny. Did you know, just jumping quickly to the fact from book 2, did you know, and I'm going to give away one of the answers to anyone who's watching, did you know that we share 50% of our DNA with a banana? Half of our DNA is the same as that of a banana.
Is that right? Really?
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And in
that explains some of my friends.
And I go into this in much more detail in second book, World-whizzing Facts. But I'll just briefly tell you, it's because back in our long millions and millions of years ago, we had a common ancestor with not just all animals, but also all plants. So our great grandparents were the same as that of a banana. So we evolved over time, and over time, as we evolved, we separated out into animals and plants, and then into cats and dogs and elephants and humans. But way back then, we had a common ancestor with a banana. And that common ancestor was able to do some of the things that we do today. So for example, and that bananas do, and that humans do, and that flies do. So for example, animals, humans, bananas, we're all made of cells, as was our common ancestor. So we need the same genes, DNA, that's in our DNA, are our genes, which give us information how to do things. We need to be able to make cells, which make up our bodies and make up bananas' bodies. We need to be able to grow, so do bananas. We need to be able to be yellow. No, we don't. That's just bananas. We need to be able to reproduce, make babies, so do bananas. So as we evolved over time, we evolved to be able to do all sorts of interesting things that bananas can't do. And bananas evolved to be bendy and yellow. Yep. But some key things stayed the same. And actually, those key things actually make up an awful lot of who we are.
Wow.
So there is a lot in common. In fact, we have over 90%. In fact, I think it's about 99% of our DNA in common with a chimpanzee.
Goodness me.
Because there's so much. They have legs and arms and eyes and ears, just like we do. So actually,
thank goodness for that 1%.
Thank goodness for that 1%. But what that does tell us is that 1%, we're actually, all humans are actually incredibly similar. Even though we all feel, some of us feel, well, we're very different to that person or that person. Actually, when in the grand scheme of things, we're actually mostly exactly the same.
Right.
So, you know, no matter what we look like, no matter where we come from, whether we're short or tall or big or small or black or white or big nose, small nose, you know, we're all pretty much the same.
So being half banana is why we find some people to be appealing. Is that right?
I think we're going on a little tandem there. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Anyway, back to where we were.
Back to tickling. We're talking. You're going to tell me how
this is what happens in my book. This is what happens in my book. Is basically I just start talking about one topic, and then I have an idea, and I just write my book in one go, and I'm like, I have one idea, and then I'm like, oh, and I look on the internet and think, oh, what about bananas? And then I write about that, and I think, oh, what about that? So my book just kind of goes very in and out of random topics. But anyway, bringing us back to the point of tickling. So yes, mind over matter. So it's not that we can just outthink it, but what we can do is think, okay, how can we trick our brain into doing something that allows the tickle not to be ticklish? So for that, we have to think a bit outside the box and think, okay, is a tickle ever not ticklish? And let me give you a clue here. Can you tickle yourself?
So I know this. I know I have tried this because someone once told me you can't tickle, you don't laugh when you tickle yourself. And I tried it and it was true. It blew my mind. Like I had never done it, but when I did it, if I touch my tickle like that and someone does it to me, I laugh. But if I do it, it's not ticklish.
Exactly. So being ticklish relies on the element of surprise, which kind of makes sense because back in caveman days, if something came along onto our skin that tickled us, it was likely to be some kind of insect that would bite us or sting us or scratch us. And that tickly feeling would allow us to go, oh, surprise, flick it away, get rid of it. That keeps us safe. But can you imagine back in those days if we'd actually felt ticklish when anything touched our skin, including our own hands like that?
Right. No.
We would just fall about laughing every time we put on our shoes and socks.
We would never be able to work. We would
never be able to do anything. So our brain has evolved to feel ticklish when it's a surprising feeling, but to be able to block the tickly feelings when it's our own hands. And it does that by making a prediction about how our hands are going to feel on our skin just before we touch ourselves, just before we touch our armpits. So given that, how can we use that information? This is what I mean about like finding the answer by kind of thinking about what we do know and how can that get us to the right answer. How can we use that information to think, okay, how can we trick our brains into thinking that the tickler's hands, who's tickling us, are actually our own hands and therefore being able to block the tickle? So definitely it helps if you're expecting it, but the thing is you can't tell exactly where I'm going to touch you.
Okay,
that's why I kind of is so ticklish.
How do I just got to imagine I've just got to imagine I've got 4 arms.
You're so close. You're so close. Instead of imagining you've got 4 arms, with your 2 arms,
yes,
or with my hands coming in, what if you put your hands onto my hands as I tickle you?
Yes.
Then your brain basically is being tickled
hands.
by your own hands at the same time. So it's going to block the feelings.
Is that right?
And it doesn't tickle.
Oh my goodness, that is fantastic.
It's true. It's totally true. You can try it. You can try it when you've got somebody else, not just through the screen.
Yeah, no, we'll try that. So I think everybody watching this should try that now. I think everybody, whoever you're sitting next to, put your hands on their hands, they try and tickle and see if you like. That would be wonderful.
It's brilliant. There is one place in your body where you can tickle yourself.
Well, I'm very ticklish on the soles of my...
Well...
Your mouth?
Roof of your mouth. Put your tongue up to the roof of your mouth. It's a funny feeling, isn't it? That is tickly. For most people, that's pretty tickly. But the hands, because you can't put your hands on your tongue anyway.
No. Pretty
but the hand thing will work. For most people, there's always in science, there's always exceptions. But we go with the consensus, the majority. So for most people, well, you just have to put your hand.
That's very useful bit of science. That's very.
See, I told you science is useful.
It is. Have you got another one from that book?
Yeah, I tell you what. I'm going to do my other favourite book from favourite fact from Brain Fizzing Facts, and you can read this one on the screen. This says, which of these animals can breathe through its bottom?
Right.
Now, I'm going to read you the multiple choice answers, because in the book I always give multiple choice answers, and then we work through each of them and work out which ones are not true and why the one that is true is true. So, which of these animals can breathe through its bottom? Is it a turtle, a frog, a dolphin, or a pufferfish? Any thoughts?
I will eliminate the 2 that I know the most about, because I would have thought a turtle and a frog, I probably might have heard that they could do that. So I will eliminate them for that reason. A pufferfish I know nothing about, other than the fact they are fat and bloated, which makes me think maybe that's the answer.
Maybe fat bottom
maybe
fish.
fat, there's got a lot that's got to come out, so it can come out, it's got to come out both.
I love the way you're thinking. This is how science works. It's about thinking like this.
So that's what but dolphins, maybe it's got something. No, I'm going to go with pufferfish, because for no other reason. They got so much bloating that's got to come out everywhere.
Okay, so let's go through the 4 options. Let's zip through the 4 options. So pufferfish, let's start with the pufferfish. So pufferfish, just like all fish, have a special way of breathing, but it's not through its bottom. So how do fish tend to breathe?
They breathe through their gills, don't they?
Exactly. So pufferfish was a bit of a curveball, because
I should have known.
Because it's a pufferfish, it's just like a normal fish.
Fair enough.
Fish, they don't actually breathe. Breathing's not quite the right word for it, but they absorb oxygen from the water as it passes over their gills. Right. So that's how all fish kind of breathe, but actually that's how they get oxygen. Breathing is basically just a way of getting oxygen into their blood so that they can then use that to make food. So
those of you out there who thought it was...
Sorry, not to make food, to make energy.
Those of you out there who thought it was pufferfish like me, you can sit on your hands, because you're no longer in this game. We'll work through the other ones.
Yeah, and of course, sorry, it's using oxygen to make energy, not food. Yes. They eat the food and the oxygen and use that to make energy. So it's not a pufferfish, they use gills. Okay. So what about anything else here have gills? Does a frog have gills?
So I was gonna... Oh, yeah, good. Amphibious. Yes, I think they do.
So actually, frogs are interesting, because their skin acts as one big gill. Yes, because their skin is covered in water, and they absorb oxygen through their skin from that water. So it's kind of like a big gill. But the frogs are very interesting, because they also absorb oxygen or breathe in the same way as we do, because they have how do we breathe? What do we use to absorb oxygen? Humans.
What do we use?
Yeah, how do we breathe? What do we use to breathe? And
inhale.
We inhale the air and we absorb it through the oxygen through our lungs.
That's right.
And just like us, frogs have a windpipe and they have lungs, and they absorb oxygen that way. So they have 2 ways. They have through their skin, a bit like fish.
Yes.
When they're covered in water, and they also have through their mouth and lungs. but they don't absorb it through their
So
body.
it's not them. So we're down to 2.
Okay, so what about dolphin? How does the dolphin absorb? How does the dolphin get air into its body?
It can't be the dolphin, because if I think about dolphins, I think they come up for air and they breathe out. And I've never seen a dolphin come out bum first.
No, they don't. And they don't come out face first either. What do they put to the surface to get in the air? Suck in air.
I guess it's the dorsal fin.
It's the little hole by their dorsal fin, called a blowhole. So they suck in air. They don't need their bottom. They suck in air through their blowhole. They get it into their lungs, just like we do actually, but we do it through our mouth. They absorb the oxygen and then they scoosh the air back out, like sort of turbocharged snot that comes out through their blowhole.
Like whales.
Like whales, exactly. And often you can see it. It looks like they're shooting out water, but it's actually they're shooting out air, and a bit of water comes with it, sort of kind of gooey snot type stuff. So it's not dolphins.
No.
So that leaves us.
There's only one left.
With a turtle. So a turtle, if we think about it, okay, when it's on land, it has a mouth and it has lungs, so it can breathe like a frog and like a human. But when it's in the water, like a frog, it can't absorb oxygen through its skin, because it's got an enormous great shell covering it, right? Hard shell. So it can't do that. But yet some turtles have to exist for long periods of time underwater. So for example, there's turtles that live in very cold places that actually hibernate under the surface of a frozen lake. So they can't come to the surface, because it's actually warmer under the surface of a frozen lake than it is on the land in the winter. So whilst they're hibernating, they can't absorb oxygen through gills. They haven't got any gills. They can't absorb it through their skin because of their shell. So they've come up with a very clever way of absorbing oxygen through their bottom.
Wow.
So what they do is they suck in water through a little hole in their bottom, which is called the cloaca. It's basically a bottom. And this cloaca is like the inside of our lungs. It allows them to absorb oxygen from the water through the kind of little bags inside the cloaca into the turtle's body. And it absorbs the oxygen, turns it into energy, and then it can use that energy to survive for long periods of time whilst it's hibernating underwater. So
what a very useful bottom.
Isn't it a useful bottom?
Very useful.
So yeah, they suck in water with oxygen in and out of their bottom about 60 times a minute. So every second they're kind of scooshing it in and out into their bottom whilst they're underwater. Cool, isn't it?
That is magnificent. So now I just want to move on to the next book of yours, which takes us into another sort of world, if you like, World-whizzing Facts. Can you tell us something from there? Again, something that something interesting, something fascinating, something bizarre, or something we need to know.
I'll tell you something you really, really need to know.
Yes.
Is that, did you know that there is something? Okay, so a lot of the facts in this, well, not a lot of them, but a couple of them are about bodily functions like wee and poo and vomit. And then of course we've got facts about planets and space and all sorts of other cool things. But you know, I had a slight obsession with wee and poo and vomit for a short while whilst writing this book. And I found out something really extraordinary about how animals and humans wee. Okay. And which was that there's something that all animals have in common, all animals, that is, all mammals, bigger than rabbits and sort of reasonably sized mammals, have in common when they wee, which is, you know, sort of think, well, you know, what might that be? All animals bigger than a rabbit, when they wee, they take the same amount of time. Now, when I found that out, I was like, whoa, what? That doesn't make sense. How can like a tiny little dog or my little kitten, oh, here she is again, like how can this tiny little creature, who is bigger than a rabbit, take the same amount of time to wee as an enormous elephant or as a human? Surely this little kitten has got a much smaller bladder than an enormous elephant, so therefore surely it would take less time to wee. Now this, you see, is another really cool bit of science, because this is actually to do with physics. Because if we think about it, yes, a little kitten has a tiny little bladder, but so too, in proportion, is the rest of its body. And that's the sort of maths things. You know, as we get bigger, in proportion, the bladder gets bigger, but so does the tube that leads from the bladder to the outside world. Any idea what that tube's called, Nick? The tube leading from the bladder to the outside?
I wasn't very good at
It
biology.
begins with U. It's called a urethra.
Oh, of course.
Urethra. It's all right. Most people don't know that one. I
knew when
you've answered all of them so far. So that the urethra, that's the tube in an elephant, is actually in proportion with its bladder much bigger than the tube in a little cat. Wow. And actually the bladder exerts the same amount of pressure to squeeze the wee out, but because it goes through a wider and longer tube, that means that when the wee flows down the tube, it can end up flowing faster down the tube. So it's got what we call a faster flow rate. Plus the tube is wider, so it's got a larger area for the wee to come out of. So you've got a wider, longer tube, more wee coming out, and they kind of balance each other out. Right. So overall, as long as you're absolutely bursting and your bladder is totally full, whether you're a tiny little kitten or a human or an elephant, the amount of time that it takes to get all the wee out will actually be the same.
The same. I mean, that is interesting. That is.
And then the scientists who discovered this fact, so there were scientists, there's scientists.
I wondered how do you discover that?
So there are scientists out there who work on the most weird and wonderful things. So there are scientists who studied this, and when they realized this crazy fact, they actually gave it a name, and they called it, wait for it, the universal law of urination.
Or ULU.
The ULU. So I just love that idea that they've published scientific papers and journals about the universal law of urination. So
that's science, but how or why is it useful? Is all science useful?
Yeah. So all science is useful. And to segue us into that, which means to lead us into that, I'd like to just link to another fact that's actually seems like it's about we, or might be about we, but it actually leads us onto something very useful. So it's actually about making decisions. So and there is a link to we, you'll see where in a minute. I'm going to read out the one because I remember the answers, but I want to show you the picture as well.
Yep.
Did you know that there is one of these ways that will help us to make better decisions? So did you know that we make better decisions when we are one of these 4 things? Either when we're hungry, when we're tired, when we need a wee, or when we've been just stung by a wasp. So that seems rather silly, surely. So we can probably eliminate that one. Like when I've been stung by a wasp, the last thing I want to do is make a good decision. I'll be kind of hopping mad. Right. Hungry.
When I'm hungry, my only decision is what am I going to eat? Like that is it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not always the right decision. I don't go for the healthiest all the time.
Exactly. And I'm going to tell us in a moment why it's so important that we know about making good decisions in terms of actually protecting the planet. So I'll come to that.
Thank you.
But in terms of the science of what's going to help us, being hungry is not going to help. Being stung by a wasp is just a bad idea generally. Being tired,
you never make a good decision when you're tired.
No, exactly.
That is the worst time
I just get very grumpy.
Oh,
so, all right. So that leaves us with this ridiculous sounding answer that needing a wee. So I told you there was a link to wee.
Yes.
And so again, this was a group of scientists who studied the most ridiculous thing, which was they were studying decision making, and they were seeing whether people made better decisions when they needed a wee. Don't ask me why, but they thought they'd study this. And what they did is they said to people, so they defined a good decision as a decision with a good long-term outcome, rather than something you want right now, but you might regret or might have a kind of bad knock-on effect. So they said to people, would you like a bar of chocolate, or would you like to wait till tomorrow, in which case I'll give you £10.
Which is about $20 for everyone out there. Yep.
$20. Yep. So obviously the better decision is to wait till tomorrow, not just because chocolate's not very good for you and it's not very good for your teeth, but also if you really did want chocolate, you could buy loads of it with $20. So if you waited. So it's obviously good to be able to control that emotional urge to just have the chocolate. Yes. And what they found is that when people needed a wee, they were more able to control that urge to have the chocolate, not just because they wanted to make a quick decision and rush to the bathroom, but actually they made a better decision to control the urge and wait till tomorrow. And what they think is happening is they think that there's a part of the brain that's responsible for controlling our physical urge to wee, like our physical urge to do anything, in this case, to let the wee out and wee on the floor. So when we need a wee, we have to control that urge to empty our bladder. And whilst our brain is unconsciously working hard to control that urge, it's also able to better control our emotional urges, like the urge to eat that chocolate. Now, the question is here is like, okay, this seems a bit of a random, strange fact, but why is it useful? That's what you asked me, Nick. Why is it useful?
And I suddenly thought that what we need to do is make sure that we give politicians lots and lots and lots of water, and then they're not allowed to go to the toilet until there's just about to make a decision, and then they will make better decisions for the world. Is that right?
This is exactly it.
Oh,
this is exactly it. And what I say in my book is that actually several world leaders have admitted to using this wee holding technique when they go into negotiation meetings.
Oh my God.
It's absolutely true. So using this key bit of science, it's actually quite useful, because if we were to go shopping, for example, and we were to go to like a department store, now obviously we don't want to have any accidents, so we don't want you needing a wee too much, but they always put lots of bathrooms in department stores because they don't want you needing a wee, because they want you to buy all this stuff, right? But if you make sure you need a little bit of a wee, a little bit, then that's going to make sure that you control a little bit. You control the urge to sort of just buy lots of things that you don't actually want or need. Wow. Now, this is where it gets quite important, because not only obviously buying things that you don't want or really, really need, there's a difference between want and need, isn't there? Buying things that you don't really need, like an extra trampoline for the garden if you've already got one, or another rabbit, or whatever it is, or another piece of Lego, or another computer game. If you don't really need that, then apart from the fact that it's going to save you money, which is obviously important on a personal level, in terms of a more general, like helping people, helping the world level, why is it important to make good decisions, in this case about not buying things, not buying extra things that you don't actually need? But a lot of factories are still using coal, oil and natural gas, which they burn to release energy. And that's the energy that then drives the manufacture of Lego and toys and games and clothes and a lot of stuff that we buy in the stores. And the thing is that burning fossil fuels not only releases energy, but also releases what?
Well, it releases carbon, fossil,
carbon dioxide. That's the one, carbon dioxide. And as a lot of us probably know by now, carbon dioxide is what's known as a greenhouse gas.
That's right.
Now, greenhouse gases include also water vapor and methane. And we shouldn't be kind of kidded into thinking that greenhouse gases in themselves are bad, because it's really important that we have things like carbon dioxide, methane and water vapor in our atmosphere, because greenhouse gases form a layer around our atmosphere, which acts as sort of like a fluffy blanket, and it keeps heat in. So when the sun shines on the earth, the sun's rays hit the earth heats up, absorbs heat, and then the earth radiates some of that heat back out to space. Now, our fluffy blanket of greenhouse gases traps some of that heat and helps us stay warm. Without it, it would be far too cold on Earth for us to survive. It would be nice and hot during the day because of the sun, but freezing cold at night. So we need that fluffy blanket. And for thousands, if not millions of years, well, for certainly hundreds of thousands of years, that fluffy blanket has remained just the right thickness. So for the last 12,000 years, which is when agriculture started 12,000 years ago, our fluffy blanket has remained just the right thickness, just the right levels of carbon dioxide and water vapor and methane. And that's thanks to something called the carbon cycle, where carbon dioxide gets absorbed by trees and by the ocean and by plants. Then it gets cycled through to animals who eat the plants and trees. The carbon goes into the animals. Then it goes into the soil and gets trapped in the soil. And then some of it gets pushed back out into the atmosphere as the animals breathe out, or as the trees respire as well, mostly animals, or when the animals and trees die and decay and are burnt, and it goes back into the atmosphere. So our carbon dioxide levels have remained nice and constant, and our fluffy blanket has remained nice and just the right thickness, and that's given us just the right conditions for humans to settle and farm. And that period of time where our fluffy blanket has remained the right thickness has given us a nice stable climate. where it's not too warm, not too cold, just perfect for humans to live and farm. And that at that time in history, where nice stable climate, was called the Holocene. Now, that is why it's very important that those greenhouse gases stay the same. However, in recent years, particularly in the last 150 years since the Industrial Revolution began, we've been doing, humans, let's be specific here, have been doing various activities that have been increasing the levels of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. So we've already mentioned one, so that's burning fossil fuels. So in factories, also burning fossil fuels to drive our cars, to fly in aeroplanes, to power trains and boats, which is why when I talked about the manufacture of clothes and Lego and stuff, it's not just about the factories that manufacture it, pumping out carbon dioxide from the fossil fuels, but also the lorries and the trains and the aeroplanes that bring it to us. So every time we burn fossil fuels, because fossil fuels were actually made from dead plants and sea creatures that were trapped and buried millions of years ago, they contain carbon. So when fossil fuels are burned, that carbon is released in the form of carbon dioxide, and that enters the atmosphere and adds to the thickness of our fluffy blanket. In addition, we've been farming increasing numbers of cows and sheep for the dairy industry. And you probably know that there's actually around 3 billion cows on our planet right now. And cows are a really big problem. Of course, we need some cows, but cows, when we farm them in increasing numbers for meat and for dairy, cows burp and fart methane. And methane is another really powerful greenhouse gas, and that's adding to our fluffy blanket. Plus, we've been chopping down trees. And trees, as I mentioned, are part of the carbon cycle. They trap and store the carbon dioxide as carbon in their trunks and in their bodies. And we chop down trees. Not only does that mean we can't absorb so much carbon from the atmosphere, from the carbon dioxide in the fluffy blanket, but we also then release it when we burn the trees. Plus, it gets worse, doesn't it? You know, we've been plowing up our soils, and our soils, through intensive agriculture, through intensive farming techniques, which don't look after the land, we've been plowing up the soil, and the soil is another place where a lot of carbon is stored. So then we're releasing the carbon as carbon dioxide from the soil. So if you put this all together, in the last 5,000 years, but particularly in the last 150 years, we've been releasing all of these extra greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Our blanket's been getting thicker, and because of that, we've been trapping more and more heat. And that is leading to huge problems. So actually, the temperature on our planet has been creeping up. For the last 100,000 years or so, it's been up and down a little bit, but not any big fluctuations. But the temperature on our planet now is hotter than it has been for at least 100,000 years. And the levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere are higher than they've been for 3 million years. And we're talking including the last 800,000 years where we've cycled in and out of the ice ages, where it gets cold and then warm and cold and then warm. But actually, we're talking about much faster increases in heat and in carbon dioxide levels than what took us in and out of the ice ages.
The fact that the whole Earth has been heated up by 1 degree, an enormous amount of energy. But let's end by what can we do about it? What can individuals do about it? What, we need to do something about it.
So the first thing to realize is that what really needs to be done is that we really need to work together. We really need to come together as a country, as a whole world, and we need to work together on this. There's only so much that we can do as individuals. So I don't want any of us thinking, we have to solve it all ourselves. We can't, but we can make a difference. You're never too small to make a difference. Look at Greta Thunberg, who famously led the world's climate movement for young people and the climate strikes. So, it's absolutely about working together. It's about letting the grown-ups in your life know what's going on. It's about, you can write to your local MP, I don't know if you call it that there, and get change that way. But there's also things we can do as individuals to help. So I just want to, really emphasize that it's not all on our shoulders. We do need to be looking to the adults to be making changes and to those in charge to be making changes. But we can also help ourselves on individual levels. So one thing I already mentioned is that we can really think about the stuff that we're buying, because remember, everything we buy is made in factories that use fossil fuels, and it's transported. So we can buy things that are made locally. That will really help with the transport. We can make sure we don't use too much transport that uses fossil fuels ourselves, so cutting back on using the car, certainly cutting back on flying if we can do that, increasingly walking or cycling, using kind of green modes of transport, or if we do need to travel distances, using public transport, and trying to choose transport now that's powered using renewable energy. So
and growing and eating your own vegetables.
Growing and eating your own vegetables.
They don't have to. There's no carbon footprint when you walk into your back. It's only your own footprints. They're in your garden.
Brilliant example. Grow and eat your own vegetables. So not only are we therefore saving on the emissions from transport, but we're also looking after the soil. We're saving on all the soil being ploughed up by intensive agriculture, which means that if we can't grow our own vegetables, certainly we should be looking for vegetables that are grown organically, which means using less chemicals, and sustainably, which means using, rather than big agriculture, intensive agriculture that damages the soil, we can be looking for better farming techniques, and increasingly there are much better farming techniques. And talking of food, it's also very useful if we can start to really cut down on the amount of meat that we're eating, particularly things like beef and lamb, and the amount of dairy, because those are the things where that's all the methane coming out. And again, if it's local, it's better, but it's far better to just cut back on meat and dairy, if possible entirely, and to go switch to eating plant-based diet and to eating lots of beans to make up for the protein that you're missing from the meat. And when it comes to buying things, as I said, I'm not saying, you know, don't ever buy a new toy or a new game. You know, if you need it, that's great, but just really try to think, what can I instead reuse that I've already got? What can I recycle? What can I buy from a charity shop? What can I buy online from swapping with people? How can I repurpose something? How can I repair something that's damaged, or that's an item of clothing, rather than buy it new? So all of those things really will make a difference. And if you're living somewhere, maybe you can talk to your parents, your family, about what kind of energy you're using in your home. Is it possible to switch where you're living? Is there a possibility to switch to a green energy provider? That's a provider that, rather than using fossil fuels to generate electricity or power, using things like wind or solar power, or tidal power, hydroelectric power. These are all things that don't release fossil greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. And so there's a lot that we can do with our lifestyle. Those kids that are
watching this now, I can tell you can make a difference, because I have changed my behavior a great deal over the years because of my daughter, who doesn't stop nagging me and telling me to change my energy plan and to stop eating beef and to do all that. And I've changed my behavior because of my daughter. So you can make a difference just by talking to your parents and telling them and reminding them. And the beauty of these solutions that you're talking about, we know about them because of science. To go full circle, because of scientists who know how to make things better.
So absolutely everything I've talked about today, everything has come about from science. It's come about from people understanding the world. People often say to me, why do we need to know about all this worrying stuff about climate change and why it's all happening? I'm like, well, if we don't understand why it's happening, how can we change it? How can we make it stop? How can we come up with new ideas for new solutions? How can we find ways to rewild our countryside so that more, and we haven't even talked about wildlife and, you know, the decline in wildlife, but there's wonderful, amazing schemes being pioneered by scientists and nature conservationists who are rewilding our landscape based on studying what it is that animals need in order to grow, in order to come back to local areas. So it's all based on an understanding of our world, whether it's understanding energy, whether it's understanding wildlife and the natural world, whether it's inventing solutions for the future, or like conserving what the wildlife we have already on our planet. But everything comes about, first of all, from knowledge, from an awareness, and then from using that knowledge to look towards solutions to how can we do things differently and better in the future.
Dr. Emily, thank you so much. It's been so much fun. I've learned so much about tickling and which are, of course, very important things, but are also about obviously helping to change the world and about how much fun science is. And thank you so much for sharing all that with us and telling us about your life and what you do.
Thank you. I'm going to leave you with a taster, the cliffhanger.
Okay.
In World-whizzing Facts,
yes.
Just back to my favourite topic, which is poo.
Yes.
Did you know that there is an animal that does square-shaped poos? And I'm not going to tell you the
Oh,
answer.
no, we got.
I'm not going to tell you the answer.
Find the book tomorrow.
You'll have to read this one.
Okay,
to find
we're
out.
going to have to get that one, and we will have to find out which animal it is. I know it's not rabbits because I've got rabbits, and it's not them.
It's not rabbits.
So that's one that I know of. But thank you. I'm going to get that and find out. Thank you, Dr. Emily.
Thank you for having me.